Over the past 2 days, the war between Russia and Ukraine has once again returned to the center of global attention. Massive missile strikes, an energy crisis, court proceedings, and diplomatic activity. All of this creates the sense that the conflict is approaching a new point of tension. Against the backdrop of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to the United States and the upcoming meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, ground operations continue with the same intensity. Today, we will examine the key events, their interconnection, and possible consequences for regional and global security. On October 16th, Russia carried out a series of massive missile and drone strikes targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure. The main targets were gas industry facilities, including the Shebelinka plant in the Kharkiv region, one of the largest in the country. According to Ukrainian authorities, the strikes caused large fires and significant destruction. The Minister of Energy reported that several underground gas storage facilities and fuel transportation infrastructure were damaged. Energy companies estimate that this is one of the largest attacks on gas infrastructure since the beginning of 2024. The goal is clear: to undermine Ukraine's energy resilience ahead of the winter season and reduce its capacity to export to Europe. Simultaneously with strikes on gas facilities, power lines and distribution substations in 8 regions were also attacked. According to Ukraine's Ukrenergo, the total capacity of disabled energy blocks exceeded 2 gigawatts. This created an electricity deficit and forced operators to temporarily introduce emergency shutdown schedules. As a result of the attacks, millions of Ukrainians faced power outages. The most affected were the eastern and central regions, Poltava, Sumy, and Dnipropetrovsk. Some areas remained without electricity and heating for several hours at a time. It is becoming increasingly clear that Russia is once again returning to the tactic of pressuring the civilian population through the destruction of critical infrastructure. This strategy was already used during the winter of 2022 to 2023. And according to experts, is once again aimed at undermining morale and the stability of the home front. Ukrainian energy services are working around the clock. Repair crews are restoring substations and power lines, while state agencies are preparing backup energy supply schemes. At the same time, Kyiv has intensified talks with European partners on importing additional electricity from Slovakia and Poland. Economists note that even temporary power cuts have serious consequences: reduced industrial productivity, increased fuel costs, and decreased export supplies. A particularly strong reaction followed the strike on a hospital in Kharkiv. According to Ukrainian authorities, Russian air bombs and drones damaged several buildings of the medical complex. 7 people were injured, including medical personnel. About 50 patients were evacuated from the facility. Fortunately, most of them were unharmed. But the very fact of an attack on a civilian institution once again raised the issue of violations of international humanitarian law. The United Nations condemned the incident and called on the parties to refrain from attacks on healthcare facilities. The International Committee of the Red Cross expressed its readiness to provide humanitarian assistance and send specialists to assess the damage. Such incidents increase international pressure on Russia and trigger a wave of diplomatic statements. EU countries have once again reminded of the need to ensure the safety of civilians, especially in areas close to the front line. Amid military escalation, another significant development entered the information space. A Russian court in Rostov-on-Don sentenced 15 Ukrainian servicemen from the Aidar battalion to long prison terms, from 15 to 21 years. The trial was held behind closed doors. According to the Russian side, the convicted were allegedly involved in cruel treatment of prisoners and civilians. Kyiv called the trial politically motivated and in violation of the Geneva Conventions. International human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, condemned the court's decision, calling it yet another example of the judicial system being used as a tool of propaganda. For Russia, such trials serve two purposes. Domestically, they reinforce the image of just retribution, while internationally, they provide a legal pretext for detaining prisoners and negotiating their exchange for Russian soldiers. Amid internal tensions in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky traveled to the United States. The main purpose of the visit is a meeting with President Donald Trump to discuss further military support. One of the key issues is the potential provision of long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. These missiles can strike targets at distances of over 1,000 kilometers, the political context is also noteworthy. Trump announced his intention to meet Vladimir Putin within the next 2 weeks, likely in Budapest. The main goal is to discuss possible ceasefire pathways and the start of peace negotiations. However, experts note that the chances of a real breakthrough are slim. Russia shows no willingness to make concessions, while Ukraine insists that negotiations are only possible after attacks completely stop. Nevertheless, the very fact that a meeting is being prepared indicates growing pressure from international partners on both Moscow and Kyiv to reduce the intensity of hostilities. On the front lines, the situation remains dynamic, but without major changes. According to the UK Ministry of Defence, the pace of Russian offensives has noticeably slowed in recent weeks. The main fighting areas are near Kupiansk, Avdiivka, and the southern part of the Zaporizhia region. Here, positional battles continue, with neither side achieving decisive gains. Ukrainian forces are actively using drones, long-range artillery, and precision missiles to hold back the offensive. In response, Russia is intensifying its airstrikes, using guided bombs and kamikaze drones. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War assess that the front remains relatively stable, and the key efforts of both sides are now focused on preparing for the winter period. Strengthening defenses, logistics, and supply lines. The ongoing war increasingly impacts both countries' economies. The Ukrainian hryvnia remains under pressure, while the costs of rebuilding infrastructure grow monthly. International partners continue to provide financial assistance, but most of it goes toward maintaining the energy sector and social payments. In Russia, despite official claims of stability, there are growing signs of economic fatigue. Sanctions limit access to technology, exports are declining, and defense spending has reached record levels. According to independent analysts, Russia's military budget for 2025 exceeds 8% of GDP, the highest figure since the early 2000s. Such spending levels can only be sustained with high oil and gas prices, but current trends show a gradual decline in export revenues. Thus, both sides are entering the winter with heavy economic burdens and uncertain prospects. Analysts are considering several potential developments. First, a continuation of positional warfare leading to gradual resource exhaustion. This is the most likely scenario. Both sides seek to hold their defensive lines and avoid large-scale breakthroughs. Second, partial de-escalation under international mediation. If the Trump-Putin meeting does occur and yields concrete agreements, a limited ceasefire in certain areas might become possible. Third, renewed escalation if negotiations fail. In that case, Russia may intensify strikes on energy and logistics infrastructure, while Ukraine could continue attacking military targets in Russian rear areas using drones and long-range systems. The events of the past 2 days demonstrate that the war between Russia and Ukraine remains in an active phase, and diplomatic efforts have yet to produce tangible results. Russia is increasing pressure, seeking to use the energy factor as a tool of political influence. Ukraine, in turn, is strengthening its international ties and continuing its struggle to preserve its infrastructure and territorial integrity. Zelensky's visit to the U.S., discussions about Tomahawk missile deliveries, and the possible Trump-Putin meeting are all elements of a complex diplomatic game, one that will determine not only Ukraine's fate, but also the balance of power in Europe and the world. The main question remains unchanged. Will these developments lead to dialogue, or mark another step toward a new phase of confrontation?